Hey, Larken Rose here, and I'm here with Amanda, who shall be my lovely assistant at the Candles in the Dark seminars. And I've been doing random rants and articles and things about different things that Candles in the Dark touches on and different concepts that come up, rather than trying to explain the whole thing all at once. And a thing I wanted to quick make a video about, we'll just sort of have a random discussion here, is the fact that most statists don't know what voluntarists are trying to sell, as it were, what they're trying to convince them of, because most voluntarists either don't know themselves or are completely unclear about what they're saying. And a lot of this has to do with whether the person speaking, whether the voluntarist speaking understands what's going through the mind of the statist. So, for example, when you say a world without government, you already are just diving into a big, confusing, cloudy mess in the mind of the statist, because they've never thought about that. And to them, government sort of means order and structure, and you have roads and you have defense. And so what they hear is a world without those things, a world without structure and without roads and every man for himself and Mad Max and yada, yada, yada. So if you start with, let's not have government, they immediately think you're advocating something that you're not. And then you have to go through the process of backing up and trying to explain to them, I don't mean this, I don't mean that, I don't mean the other thing, here's what I do mean. And so I think one of the biggest blunders that anarchists make, for example, if they say, I'm an anarchist, immediately 90-some% of statists are going to have a false impression of what that means. And partly that's intentional and partly that's ignorance, but whatever it is, if you start out giving the wrong impression and then have to back up and correct all the misunderstandings, it's like, well, we're going that way today, and to start with, we're going to drive that way for a while and then turn around and try to backtrack. It's much better if you can start by actually conveying what you actually mean to the statist, which most voluntarists are pretty bad at, not because they don't understand the philosophy, but because one of the most difficult things about being a teacher is imagining the other person not understanding any of it and then putting it in terms that's going to make sense to somebody who's never thought about these things. And
also, I was just going to say that it's often not even that the person, that the statist, when you try to talk about a world without government, it's not necessarily that they even imagine, oh no, all the roads went away, or all the structure went away, or I don't have any of these benefits anymore. Oftentimes there's such a vague cloud of mush about the concept of government to begin with that you're all the way just bumping up against an emotion. So you're not even getting they're not responding to a concept or a clear idea of any kind. They're not even all the way thinking about a lack of something. It's all the way that it just registers a programmed, almost Pavlovian response inside them, because they've been trained to associate no government or the concept of no, rulers or any of that with, just bad. And bad has been assigned a number of negative emotions that make them feel, sort of suddenly adrift and without direction, or as though they're going to be overwhelmed by mayhem or chaos, and they don't consciously know where those emotions come from. I know that I didn't. I can remember a time when those talking about this would have just registered emotions in me, but I wouldn't have been able to articulate what those emotions meant or where they were coming from, and I wouldn't have even have been aware that someone else put those emotions into my brain and into my psyche and programmed them into me. I would have just had a sort of visceral, deeply instinctive response to somebody suggesting that we shouldn't have any government, and yet I wouldn't have been able to argue for why.
right, and that's like, if the first thing you do is trigger an emotional reaction without them understanding what you're saying, without them having an intellectual concept of what you're saying, you already made a mess. Like you didn't even get to a thought yet. You started with mushy emotions, which can easily and quickly turn into a disaster. Because most people don't have a clear idea in their head what government is. So they can't have a clear idea in their head about what society without government would mean. To them, government is this thing that does stuff. Like they've never thought about it more than that. And so you have to, it's like if you're teaching any, course in something that, I'm going to teach quantum physics or something to a bunch of people who have never heard the term and have no idea what you're talking about. Well, if you start winging out this terminology that to them is just random syllables, you're immediately going to lose them, and they'll be way more likely to jump to emotions and, well, that sounds foreign and weird and unfamiliar. When really, if you present it properly and explain it properly, nothing could be more self-evident and familiar than it's not okay to attack people, and you own yourself, you don't own the other guy, you shouldn't attack him, he shouldn't attack you. I mean, everybody grasps that. And if you can start from that point and have them go, well, yeah, of course that, duh, and just tiptoe along until they realize that those self-evident, obvious truths rule out any possibility of a legitimate ruling class, then their brain can actually be wrapped around the concept before they ever get to the emotions. But if you just say a stateless society, first of all, that's a fine example of a term that if you say a stateless society, 99% of the people will have no idea what you just said. Stateless society, they don't think in those terms, they haven't heard the vocabulary. You have to talk to them as if you expect them to understand nothing about the philosophy or the concept, because most of them do understand nothing about it.
But then forget using the word anarchy, because if you use the word anarchy, you all the way throw in a new set of negative associations. And this is coming from somebody who still loves to use the word, and partly because, I have that sort of attitude of, well, screw the people that propagandize the whole notion of it meaning chaos. I want to bring it back. But I also understand that tactically speaking, it's best not to even approach that word, because as soon as you use it, most people, if they even really have heard the word at all, they've heard it in one context, and that is, the assholes that, the media goes out of their way to film that are destroying private property and generally being, mischievous dicks to people. And if you have an association to that, then it's you already have to move past that, because now they're reacting to something they think you said and not what you actually said.
Right. You're starting in the wrong direction again and then having to repair the damage of the wrong direction. And the thing is, I don't at all mind if people grasp the concept and they're thinking about it and at some point they go, wait, you mean like anarchy? Like, okay, well, by the time you have some thoughts going and there's actually a discussion going, I don't mind that term coming up. But to start by running in the wrong direction and then trying to repair it is never a good idea, and it's totally unnecessary. And the thing is, that's what I see a lot of anarchists and voluntarists do when they first confront a statist. Government is totally illegitimate, completely illegitimate, never does anything but bad. And that's true. And the thing is, you can say a whole bunch of stuff that is conceptually true that will have a completely counterproductive effect. If you're trying to have somebody actually understand what a voluntary stateless society is, you can say things that are literal truths that make their brain shut down or freak out or get defensive or whatever. So one of the main things that Candles in the Dark focuses on is their psychology and your psychology, so you know who you're talking to. You understand their mindset better than them. You understand how they are going to hear what you say. And you tailor your message based on how it's going to sound to them, not how it sounds to you. And the thing is, that's something that almost nobody does. Almost everybody goes, well, I have this idea in my head, and I'm going to say it into words, and if it doesn't land in your head the way it is in my head, well, that's your fault. Well, okay, but that doesn't work. That's a really ineffective way to communicate. You have to figure out the words that are going to mean it to them, not the words that mean it to you. And that's one of the most fundamental things that Candles in the Dark focuses on. Not only the general psychology and approach, your psychology and theirs, but even specific lines of questioning of how to bring up the topic without immediately setting off, knee-jerk emotional responses before they have even a hint of an intellectual concept in their head. Just start by scaring them with, oh no, it sounds like chaos and mayhem. So a lot of it is just, it really is like, dealing with a wild animal or somebody with a mental disorder, like how you approach them and what you say, and be very careful that you don't set them off. And it doesn't matter that, like, well, what you said was perfectly rational and true and everything else. If they freak out and run away, it didn't do any good.
Mm-hmm.
And so what matters is the effectiveness and how many people give up statism. And you can, and this applies to so many statists I've seen, and it's applied to me for a whole bunch of years, are just have the attitude of, well, I said the truth, and if they can't handle it and freak out and run away, well, that's because, they're being stupid and blah, 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 blah. And you can say that, and it can be true, but it doesn't do any good. If you don't learn the language and the approach that actually gets through to them, you can sit there and be all right about how correct you are and how wrong they are. The world is still going down the toilet in the meantime because there are too many statists and not enough voluntarists.
And the good news is now there's a huge liberty community out there constantly working to spread the message. The less than ideal issue, though, is that so many people who have found liberty, and not all of them at all, but so many of them who found it really did find it because they were able to get over actual program hurdles to restore logical thinking. But the problem is that a lot of us didn't all the way get there just by having logic preached at us. It started off with a slow, gradual thing over time of stuff getting through our psyche, a bit of truth being put into our realm here and there from other people spreading it, stuff about history that wasn't what we thought, things that challenged us. And we gradually got there, and then we got to a point where we were able to restore a logical thinking brain about this sort of thing. But then what happens is so many people in the liberty community who want to spread this idea, who are passionate about what they figured out, they want to just preach the end point that they got to at the people around them. And they're frustrated because they don't understand why barking 2 + 2 = 4 at people isn't working. And it does seem obvious to us now, but the important part and the approach that Candles in the Dark is taking is remembering that this isn't where statists are starting from, and this isn't even how most of us started. We didn't start off with, somebody threw the logic in our face and we just went, oh, okay. And that's not how it works. And so the whole community of people who are now, free in heart and mind and also don't believe in authority anymore in any form, those people can be so much more effective at spreading the message, and the message will go further, faster. Just, it will be like wildfire when people understand how to talk to their former selves, because that's really what the seminar is going to be about. It's going to be about helping people remember that you're really talking to the old you in lots of ways. A few of us out there can say, well, I was kind of always an anarchist, or I was always a libertarian in some form, and I was kind of raised that way. But that's the anomaly, it's not the rule. So most of us have to remember that we're talking to the former us, and remembering that is what helps you get through. I often try to get through to people by avoiding the word politics or government or anarchy altogether. And you can all the way speak the truth without touching any of those words, without mentioning the political spectrum or anything. And you'll often intrigue people when they ask what you think of a president or of some person in power. And your response is, well, I don't really have or want anything to do with any of that. I believe that I am fine looking after my own life, and that I don't have any right to interfere in the lives of my fellow man. And so I don't think there's a place for me in that realm, because I don't want to be interfering in the lives of others. And I would like to be left alone to run my own life, since only I know best how to run it. I'm surprised how many people can get on board with me as soon as I say that. And they often are not on board the minute that you meet them in the realm of politics and try to talk about how nasty some politician is that you don't like, or how government is all evil, all the politicians are evil. If you go to their realm, you often just get lost in their abyss, in their unclear thinking, and then you can't navigate and you can't keep them out in the real world where they need to be, which is the real world is us individuals, and we're living our lives, and we want to be free to do what we want.
Right, and that's one of the main focuses of Candles in the Dark. Is there's I actually made a big visual thing that of all the pitfalls and the minefield of the human brain and the things to not bring up, the ways to not argue it, the topics to not bring up and get, thrown off course and have them change the subject and this and that and the other thing, but the way to stay on course. Because you can completely describe voluntarism without ever saying anything about government and politics. That ends up as an afterthought, like, oh yeah, that sort of rules out all that stuff, doesn't it? But it isn't a matter of we have to go do something to government. It's describing how human beings should be, and then realize government isn't a part of that. It's the thing at the end that, oh yeah, none of that, rather than that being the focus. So that's probably enough for this random arbitrary rant about it. Oh, I will throw in the thing about the fact that basically what Candles in the Dark is teaching individuals to do on a one-on-one basis what the mirror is going to do when I ever finish that thing by itself, having the discussion in a completely non-judgmental way, because it is possible. And this is the thing that I really wish I could get people to all the way understand this. The closest I can do is what I did, which is say, if you attended a Candles in the Dark seminar and you decide it didn't make you a better ambassador for anarchy, as I put it, I'll give you your money back. Because before I go through the details and go through the specifics, people can, it's easy for, and it would have been easy for me too, just, a few years ago to say, well, I already understand the issues. Why would I need to know how to speak it? Because conveying it to somebody else is a completely different thing from just understanding it in your own head. Especially because the problem is not just they haven't heard the concepts. The problem is that their entire lives they've been taught something utterly insane that is mutually exclusive to these concepts. So you have to deprogram them. It isn't just give them information. You have to pull out all the deranged, twisted indoctrination they have and then give them information that mostly they already understand. Their indoctrination has messed it up.
But better than that, Candles in the Dark is really even more about actually having empathy for the statist and having to really be inside their head and looking at what's going on in their brain. And it's less about you doing the deprogramming yourself, and I think that you would agree with me, and more about guiding them through deprogramming themselves. And I've been in conversations with people before, people who use the Socratic method, which is a lot of what Candles in the Dark is going to make use of. But people who I could tell when they were talking to me, they were trying to actually, stir up my own thoughts and my own beliefs and get me to articulate them because they were really curious and they really wanted to know, and they were digging inside my brain saying, I want to know what you believe and I want you to be able to tell me what you believe. And when I talk to those kinds of people, I can usually tell now because I also try to do that with other people. And it not only a really interesting and awesome way to converse with somebody, you also feel like somebody really cares about you because they're actually asking questions rather than preaching. But it's amazing to watch my brain do the work to try to actually envision clearly what it is I believe and be able to communicate it. And if you can get a statist trying to all the way defend and articulate in a way where they don't feel threatened, what it is that they really think and believe, they will see their own contradictions. They will see the things inside their mind that don't line up. And I think the reason that, Larken finally thought it would be a really good idea to do something like this seminar is, his book, The Most Dangerous Superstition, which has probably sold way more than any of your other books that you've done, am I right?
Yep.
That book is basically the writing form, the written version of you all the way having to dispel the notion of government and the belief in authority while constantly thinking about how the other person is going to hear the words, how they're going to perceive them, and doing it with the statist's brain in mind the entire way through. And his book has been more successful than a lot of books have been at all the way getting people to see that the whole belief in authority is bogus, because it comes at it from every angle, but in the most non-threatening way, and it uses language that everybody can understand, that everybody can relate to. And so in a way, this is both the mirror and it's the most dangerous superstition, but it's done in the form of giving the tools now actively to anarchists that and voluntarists and people all around who love liberty and are trying to spread it, giving them the tools to go out and feel like they're actually able to reach people rather than just beating up against the brick wall, because we don't want to be doing that. We want to be making people feel like we're inviting them in. This isn't us versus the statists. The statists are us, and we want the more minds are on our side, the less guns are pointed at us,
right?
And the more that are with us.
And yeah, so the key to all of those things, the books, the mirror, and Candles in the Dark, is not, like you said, is not beat them over the head with your belief system until they agree with you, which will happen pretty much never. It's invite the inner anarchist that's already inside them out to come out and see the world and actually grasp reality. And the goal is not to enslave them to your belief system. The goal is to free them to be in charge of themselves and release the voluntarists that they already were. So, all right. So I guess that's about enough of a rant for this time. So there, I'll put the link in the, in the first comment below this to more information about it and where you can get tickets. That's all for now.
See you later.